Hello, video request, video request. I got a video request yesterday and it was from a Marty McFly. He goes, "Hey broski, could you do an in-depth video request for the Merovingian dynasty? I have heard some really interesting conspiracies with the Celts' origins coming from the Basque people in the Pyrenees Mountains of southern France, tied to Atlantis, tied to the lost bloodline of Christ, and Rh negative blood tied to the early royal families of France when what's his name Charlemagne was in power. I think I remember you skimming over it in your History of France video you did when you filmed in the van. It all fascinates me thinking it could be like a lost piece of important history. Anyway, it would be cool to hear your take on this. And also, would like your take on the Richat structure in Mauritania. Many people are calling it the lost city of Atlantis. I'm big into this subject and have my own views and opinions about, but yeah, just curious what we could cook up a brainstorm. Personally, I think it would be best if you did two videos because there's so much. My opinion was going off Plato's writings is that Atlantis was a world empire going from the Middle East all the way to the Caribbean Sea, and that we were taken out over by night by an asteroid caused a flood, and that Atlantis was built the pyramids of Giza and not the pharaohs of Egypt. And they also had a space travel and went to Mars. But it all ended in a great catastrophe overnight, causing a whole civilization to start over, eventually moving to France. Also, don't you think it's kind of interesting when you look at the shape of the Gulf of Mexico? It legitimately looks like a crater. Okay, yeah. So Atlantis and the New World. I like this subject. And let's start with the Merovingian dynasty. Merovingian dynasty and Atlantis. The Merovingian dynasty. Yeah, there's a book written by somebody. My mom even has the book. I think my mom even read the book about like the legend that Jesus had a kid and the kid went to France and ended up starting a tribe that turned into the Merovingian dynasty. So then the people in the Merovingian dynasty are the direct descendants of Jesus. The guy who channels the alien Bashar, he believes that. He said that. So that's pretty trippy. All right, so let's unpack it real quick. Jesus was a rabbi. Rabbis got married, and so the stories of the Bible were written 65 years after the death of Jesus, or 30 years after the death of Jesus, like in the year 65. From hearsay, it's entirely possible that the Mary Magdalene, who they say was a whore, was actually his wife, and then she had kids, and then when he died, she went to France. It's entirely believable that they went to France because that was the Roman Empire, and that was actually right before the Jewish diaspora in the year 70 when they tore down the temple, and then made all the Jews tore away. The Jewish country, Judea, turned into a state, made all the Jews move all over the Roman Empire, and made a whole bunch of them build the Colosseum. And so, yeah, it's believable that, but that was 70 years before the diaspora, but, Jews could move around before that. And if Jesus was a leader and she was probably enough of a celebrity that she could get the money to move off into France if she wanted to, and then just forget that whole Middle Eastern thing. If you think about the psychology, it seems like it makes sense. You would want to forget if your husband died or whatever, forget about that and then move to a whole new place. So that makes sense. I mean, I didn't read the book. I don't know anything about the story. The Merovingian dynasty and the fall of Rome was in the year 476. That's when the Merovingian dynasty and the Franks came over to France, and so that's like what 500 years, 450 years after the death of Jesus. That's a pretty long time for people to keep a myth going. Christianity, didn't read the book, but I'm just tracing the possibilities if that was true. Christianity was just getting started, or got started after that. So the family of Jesus, they would have started, been martyrs and started Jesus or started Christianity since then, or in France after that, and then they could have started a family. So that's believable. But if they went to France, how would they have gone? At one point, they would have had to move out of the empire into Germany, because the Merovingians were a Frankish kingdom. And if they got there, if they got to France through the empire, because they're part of the empire, doesn't it make sense that they would just stay in the empire and not move into the barbarian territories? I haven't heard of any example of people doing that. However, I suppose it's possible if you stay. There was a lot of bleed through between the borders in the late Roman Empire, and there wasn't that much of a difference in culture between the Germanic tribes and barbarian tribes and the actual Romans. They were they all had the same religion. They were all Christian. And so and then they've had probably more or less the same technology and fighting structure and all that kind of stuff. So the Roman Empire was basically, if you're inside the Roman Empire, you're protected by the Roman army, and if you're outside the Roman Empire, you're just kind of a kingdom on your own. And so after over the years went by, it became like what was the better deal. So maybe it became not so good of a deal as staying in France, and some nice educated Christians moved into Germany, and then they became leaders of Germany and took over some tribe, and then they became the leaders of that tribe, and then moved back into Rome. So, and then there you go. There's the Merovingian dynasty. So that's possible. When you study history, I think it's best to unpack it like that instead of just believe stuff, because especially now later on, people can just make stuff up, and people have made stuff up in the past, and then if that turns into canon, that's just a tragedy. So that's about all I can say about that. Now, as far as the Merovingians, they were known as the long-haired kings. They had long hair. Tacitus was writing about Germans and an ancient German culture, and this was 400 years before. You had to. There was a difference between having long hair and short hair. If you were a warrior, you had, I think it was long hair, and then you got to grow your hair out as soon as you killed somebody. I think that's how it was. So maybe it was. So then, if by the Merovingians came around in that tribe, it was, if you had long hair, you were the leader, and that kind of meant like nobody could fuck with you, because if you're not the leader, somebody can run up to you, cut your hair off, slice your hair off. You can't really do anything back, or whatever. Or people fight each other and they cut their hair off. But if you have long hair, that means you have the money for the good shampoo, and nobody touches you, nobody yanks at you. You know what I mean? And so that's a sign, and it's beautiful to look at long hair, and so that's a sign of royalty. And so, yeah, there were the long-haired kings, Merovingians come in. But the reason I spent so much time on long hair is Jesus is known as having long hair. So maybe the tradition came in. I don't know. Anyways. So then they move in, and no, let me talk about the Merovingians, because this is kind of like a multi-subject video, but I'm going to go ahead and do it all in one video. This is kind of like a talk about Atlantis and talk as well as talk about the Merovingians. And what does that have to do with Atlantis? So maybe I will do 2 different videos. So the Merovingians. The Merovingians are, one interesting thing about the Merovingians is that they're German, they're Frankish. So. And there's not really that much history about culture of the ancient Germans. So it's just, all we know about the ancient Germans is what a Roman in Rome said about them from hearsay, and that's it. But the other way about the ancient Romans is the ancient the Frankish kingdom, because the very big the end of Rome, the Frankish kingdom at the beginning, those were all Germans who came in. So we hear about that in history. Clovis and. I think Cassiodorus was in that time writing about them, and so you hear about Clovis and killing all of his family off, and then there are his sons trying to kill each other off. That the way that I interpreted that book was that it's just that's the culture of Germanic tribes at that time. They're just barbarians, and so maybe in the past, Tacitus said Germanic tribes were not very big, and they were all moving around all the time, and so that's maybe because they just had to stay in unit, like more family structure, or else they would kill each other. So but yeah, and then the Merovingians, they turned into they got deposed, and then by Pepin the Great, and that was the guy who defeated the Muslims in 700. So they were around for like 250 years, the Merovingians. So that's what I know about them. But as far as that and Jesus or whatever, and then I think, didn't you say something about the Celts? If they have and then you said the Basques, the Celtic origins and the Basque. Yeah, I know that the Basque people have a special language that's not related to anything, and I think that means it's not even related to the Celtic languages, like Welsh languages. And so, yeah, maybe they are part of Fall of Atlantis. Well, um, yeah, I think those are just part of ancient languages for a long, long, long time ago. And yeah, if they don't have anything to do, I don't know much about the language, but yeah, I heard it has nothing to do. It's just maybe they were from somewhere else. Came in from a boat from another part of the Mediterranean or whatever. Yeah, maybe they are from Atlantis, and that'd be awesome to have the Atlantean language. Now let's believe that. See, I like to believe, and I like to dream, and I like to extend possibilities out to the maximum. So let's believe. Let's try to believe that that's true, and then make it possible. So the Celtic language is the actual direct descendant, most clear and amazingly direct descendant of the Atlantean language, because when Atlantis crashed, or a bunch of people ran off in boats, and then they found a nice place in the mountains in Basque Country, and then everybody else respected them because they all had all this knowledge from ancient past, so they protected them. One reason that there's lots of different reasons that little countries can last for a long time. But the most common reason, maybe they're good fighters, but the most common reason is they're just respected for some reason, like they have some special tradition or knowledge, and and they're so different that people just leave them alone. Herodotus in Histories was talking about these like Chinese people and who were spiritual and lived forever and up in like Siberia, and people left them alone because they're all different. So yeah, maybe that's what the Basques are all. They're just because that would be cool, because then you could listen to their language and know that that's Atlantean language. Um, but um, but um, um, but that's all I know about the Basques. Now, okay, so now let's talk about the Richat structure in Mauritania. Richat structure in Mauritania is this thing that I guess people are recently talking about. Is this big bunch of these concentric circles in Mauritania on the southern edge of the Sahara Desert and the desert, and it's like, and I saw the video this kid did about it, and it's about 2,000 feet high. But they said that if a long time ago, they proved that it actually got raised from tectonics since then. So it used to be connected to the ocean. You could look at it, maybe it was connected to the ocean, and so that could have been Atlantis, because it was this, and the concentric circles are the same size as Plato says. And when I heard that, I went like, whoa, okay. Now the thing is, Plato does describe Atlantis, but I never got around to actually tracing the actual size of the concentric circles, because I have so many other different freaking projects I'm working on right now. But that really make my ears prick up, and I want to do it as I like really badly want to do it as quickly as I can, because then you could superimpose that onto that Richat structure. I don't know of any other examples of somebody else recreating Plato's Atlantis on dimension, so that you could even look at it. Just off the top of my head, because I did figure it out in my head once, but then I forgot because I didn't put it on my website. I didn't put it on Google Earth. But yeah, maybe. I mean, if the kid said he did it, he did the calculations himself, and it was perfect. So if that's true, that's amazing. Now, I don't think it's Atlantis, but if it's true and it's the same, maybe it was two Atlantises. Like maybe the Atlantean Empire had their capital city where Atlantis was, and then they went and made, like Rome made Byzantium. They made their second capital, and they made it in the image of the first capital, because they liked the idea of concentric circles, because it was a great defensive structure. I think it's a great defensive structure. It's like, everybody retreat back to the third circle. Everybody retreat back to the second circle. And then you can like pour acid in the water, or, pull all the gates and then get up on the walls and fight. It's a good way to protect yourself it's a go back to the citadel at all costs type of situation. Yeah, especially if you have like a great like fountain in the middle of the citadel, and like a bunch of tiered bunch of animals you can live off. I don't know. But the reason I don't think that it's Atlantis is because Atlantis is an island. Like Plato said, it was an island out in the Atlantic. Now, you could the Richat structure is out in the Atlantic. If you go out in the Atlantic and then you take a left and you go down along the coast and then you go back up into. But if that was the case, Plato probably would have said that. I mean, the Timaeus that he wrote that in was a really big book, and it all got translated, and stuff gets lost in translation, but not that much. He would have said, yeah, you leave the Pillars of Hercules, take a left, go down, then you go up a river, and then it's in this thing. He clearly said it was in Atlantis, way out. It was in an island way out in the Atlantic. And what more is that he said that how big the island was. The island was about 340 by 200, 350 by 250 kilometers. He described it in stadia, and I measured the underwater part of the Andros Island in the Bahamas, and that's the exact same size, about 350 by 240 kilometers. And most of it's only like 10 feet under the water. You can see it's just like sand. It looks like a big sand dune, and that's exactly what would happen if a big old comet came from the sky, landed in South Carolina. That you can there is actually the meteorite fragments left in all of those, and you can actually see the meteorite pockets, the impact zones, like scattered all over, like a whole meteorite came in South Carolina, and with meteorites inside those craters. And so if that happened, it would have caused a huge tsunami, which would have washed away the island literally right next to it, and washed away the island, but not the entire island. You could see the rest of the island just below. Like, that's what always happens. If a little kid makes a sandcastle and then you do a big wave over it, it'll knock the sandcastle down and knock it away, but it'll still be this mound just under the water. And so that's what you get with the Andros Island. And how else could it become a mound like that? Did the mound just pop up with tectonics and then somehow become sand before it got to the surface? Or was it this island that just got blown away and then that's what's left of it? That's what it more looks like. And there's a whole bunch of examples of stuff getting blown down, like rivers and canyons and valleys and in like South Dakota or something like that, down in eastern Washington, with big boulders in the middle of this plains and evidence of tsunamis coming down. And so I think Atlantis was Andros Island. It was a southern part of Andros Island. If you download my Google Earth dimensions KMZ file, it's right on my front page of my website. You can see all the different dimensions of stuff, and I'll actually show exactly where I thought the capital was. I'm going to build it on Google Earth. I'm going to build the entire island because he described exactly how many kilometers worth of canals came from the mountains and circulated through the island. So you could recreate the island. Because he said how many different states there were, how big the states were, and what the population was, and what the city was. So, right? So you combine that with, he said the mountains and, and how many. So you just plug in all that information and you've got the island of Atlantis. He already described it. So, he didn't just describe the capital city. The Richat structure is just the capital city. The rings within rings, that's not Atlantis. That's the city. But he said he was in an island. The city was in an island that was that big, 350 by 250 kilometers, and that the city was like a good 5 kilometers or something in from the mainland. It wasn't like 200 kilometers or whatever, 700 miles or whatever, however the Richat structure is. It was only a couple miles in. That's how they could fill up those concentric rings. It came from the ocean. It didn't come from like this big inland river or sea or something like that. Because they had boats, they stored their boats in there from the sea. If they were going to store boats from the sea in the Richat structure, wouldn't they just store their boats in another place that was closer to the Atlantic Ocean? That kind of reminds me, if you're going to have boats and take them 700 kilometers and then into inland and then put them inside your little concentric ring circle, it seems like they'd just be play boats, not real boats. But I don't know actually if that was a big enough wind on the sea. Anyway, so no, what else? What was the next question? Okay, so an asteroid. Yeah, I talked about the asteroid. Pharaohs of Egypt. Oh yeah, let me talk about the rest of, just really quickly, what I think about France. I mean, the fall of Atlantis. I did some recent just only like a year ago, not that much work, but some recent work on my timeline, just to correspond with I think it was Josephus, Jewish history. He talks about Noah, and then everything happens after Noah, and so Plato said that Atlantis was 11,000 years ago, 9,500 years ago before Plato. And so on my timeline, I put that in, and And then after that, I just drew a timeline from that to recorded history, and then plugged in the information from all the the Old Testament and what happened after with Noah and all those guys. And so happened, what happened was, there was a big catastrophe. Some people knew about it because before then there was clearly a technology. So there's probably some like aliens here, two-tier government. Some people knew about the comet coming. Comet comes, destroys the Earth. Now the people who knew about it, maybe not everybody knew about it. I don't think it was like a world. There were a lot of barbarians in here. It was like wild culture. You had a wild world. You had big animals and saber-toothed tigers and giant bears and mastodons and stuff. And so it wasn't just like aliens running around with civilized cities. It was just mainly, I think, or maybe just humans who learned some technology that we never learned. We think we're so smart because we learned this, that, and the next thing, but maybe those people just knew rock levitation and maybe even electromagnetics, but not much more after that. I don't know. But okay, so they but there is this world culture. People like to say, like, really, what was the level of Atlantis? And they say, oh, maybe America and maybe the world in the 1800s or something, because they just had different technology, and it was probably given to them by aliens, just like our technology is given to us by aliens, and just trying to start some world experiment with some world culture. There was a world war between Atlantis and Athens, the Greeks and the Atlanteans, that the Greeks actually won. But that's not why Atlantis fell, and they just said Atlantis fell after that. And so anyways, but not just Atlantis, the whole fucking world fell. Like the whole world was a civilization, So Atlantis wasn't more politically active or technologically advanced anywhere else. Like Greece, Athens was the capital of Greece back in those days. And so imagine the technology they had. They even describe what it looked like the geography of it. It was different back then. Hills looked differently and stuff. But I think it was Polybius who did that. Anyway, so yeah, there was that thing, that catastrophe, and everybody gets blown away by the water and drowned. And some people who knew about it happening, or some people who happened to have boats or whatever, survived in boats. And there's some Native American myths and legends about people who, when the flood came, people built boats and they got in boats and they just stayed in the boat. You just you stay in the boat, and then the water comes more, and then the water picks up your boat, and then you're just going down some huge ass river forever, down the rapids, and then you finally get dumped out in the ocean, and then you have to paddle back in like hundreds of miles in the ocean. You have to paddle back to mainland, and then you find where mainland is now, because it's different, a little bit different from what it was then, and then and then you start life again. That's how people survived back then, is you get in boats, and then you get washed away, because the way that the flood came was too much rain. And then it's just like first the rivers fill up, then the canyons fill up, then the valleys fill up, and people are watching this happen, and so they go, oh shit, everything's going to fill up, isn't it? So then they have time to actually build boats. But some other people had technology. They hid in the Grand Canyon. There's tunnels in the Grand Canyon where they went in. That's another Native American legend. And they waited for a few weeks in their water, with their watertight thing. So that was definitely technology that was given to them. Because you can't make, Indians can't, savages can't make watertight, air circulated, food, prepared, light prepared caverns underground to survive the flood. So there's probably aliens who built that for them just to let them survive. But anyway, so then people go away, and some people probably, if you got washed out into the ocean from America, it's conceivable that you would just keep paddling towards the east, and then you would end up in Europe. So it probably did cause a little bit of that. So no, are the Celts more related to the Atlanteans than anybody else? Well, I've read a little bit about the Celts, and the Celts are, and the Wikipedia article says that they entered into France in about the 700s BC, and that by the time Julius Caesar was there in about zeros BC, 700 years later, 650 years later, they were established there, and they were big, muscular, blonde people, kind of like Germanics, and they were very religious, very knew about astronomy and astrology and stuff. And then there's the other Celtic strain in the eastern England, Wales, and Ireland and Scotland, and they preserved their language, the Welsh language. Actually, that's what my blood is. I'm 100% Celt. My brother did a blood test, one of those ancestry tests, and it was like 75% Wales, and then another 25%, like 20% Ireland and Scotland, and then like 5% German. So, and then if I look in the ancestry of all of my relatives, if you look on my website About Me page, on the upper right, you can see, because I researched it on the websites, genealogy websites, direct ancestry to all those kingdoms, like 7 different kingdoms in Wales, and the Celts, and then the Strathclydes, the islands between Scotland and Ireland, and yeah, like 30 different kings and stuff. But then somebody else said that there were giants who lived in those days, and so maybe that the legends of what we think are Celts are actually were the giants that then got assimilated or killed off. Because everybody talks about the giants, the Native Americans, the Middle Easterners, the Northern Europeans. Everybody talks about the giants. I think even the Asians. And so they were. It was just kind of like back in those days. It was wild times. They had giant animals. Period. Just because there was more. That's a good question. More abundance of stuff, I guess, food. But yeah, giant lions and bears. But it was just a different strain of people. There were little people too. Little pygmies who were 3 feet tall. They found in Indonesia back in 2013 or something, 2009, and they were just another strain of people. And maybe they were half. Well, actually, the Bible says they were half alien, half human. So maybe that's what they were. But anyway, yeah. But let me finish this real quick. At the end of the fall of the civilization of Atlantis, people just survived, and it wasn't that many people who survived. It wasn't any civilization. The biggest unit was like a tribal unit, like a families and stuff. And so they basically got to start. It was like a blood transfusion. They got to start from scratch. But they did get their myths and legends, from handed down, and then they slowly built it back after that. But of course, there was a whole lot of other, knowledge as well. Maybe they had written knowledge from before Atlantis, and then just slowly went away. We've lost a lot of ancient knowledge from burning of, libraries and stuff. But maybe that compartment under the Sphinx will have new hieroglyphics for us to decipher, or computer chips, computer crystals for us to tap into. I bet you those crystal skulls, the government, I think, needs to sequester all of those crystal skulls that people have, and put them in the Smithsonian so that those people don't accidentally lose them, or some nefarious force accidentally takes them from those people, because I think that it's a good chance that those crystal skulls are actually hard drives, that if we have the technology, we could figure out how to get information, and it actually has a history of the universe and those things. But I don't know. That's what I think about Atlantis and the Merovingians. No, I don't think to read into the Merovingian dynasty. That's an interesting little idea, but it doesn't really mean anything. It doesn't go anywhere. It's just a fun little story. If you're going to connect Merovingian to Atlantis and Jesus, and if you start telling stories like that, it's like you're trying to create some special type of group of people, but then a special type of group of people you can't prove. So it's just a story. But yeah, it's interesting. But yeah, I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense to be, maybe it'll turn into something real. Like they'll go to the ancient Merovingian hut and find the third book of Jesus or something or something. I don't know. Okay, yeah. So that's enough. Thank you. Bye bye.